Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again as we continue with our Justice for Aaron Brady campaign. As you are aware, I'm sure, we're scrutinising a series of podcasts created by Ian Doyle in association with the Irish Sun and editor Stephen Breen. And these podcasts detail the career of investigating officer with An Garda Síochána, Mr. Pat Marry. Obviously, we're just scrutinising and looking at the podcasts that are relevant to the modern robbery at Lordship Credit Union, where Detective Garda Adrian Donoghue lost his life. We have already covered two of the podcasts, 9 and 10, in a series. There is a series before that, a number of videos before that in relation to other cases. Just want to clear that up. So I'm looking for you, the public, to listen to, and in particular, this podcast number 11, called Undercover. And it's very detailed, some of the information goes into, and a lot of it too is absolute nonsense and almost comedy when we listen to some of it. It's been difficult to break it down. I had it much longer actually, and we've cut a lot of it out. So what I'm going to do with this, with podcast number 11, initially, we're going to have a very quick look at the continued thread that we have shown clearly that Pat Marry and his superiors are completely at odds. And the incident room in Dundalk is a complete and utter farce in relation to the investigation. It could not have been going smoothly, and there's a lot of detail in this podcast which shows a lot of contradictions and indeed lies in relation to how the investigation is going along, and dates, etc. So initially, in this evening's video, we're going to just look at that Pat Marry's state of mind at the time he was involved in the investigation, his breakaway from it, and his mindset 3 years later when he comes back to the fold, he comes back into the incident room, which is in itself is strange. We're then going to have a look at the American aspect, and this is where we start looking at Homeland Security's involvement in Aaron's case. There's a lot of input from two detectives, Gonzalez and Walsh, and we're just going to look through that briefly, and we'll show very, very clearly that this is fluff journalism. There's absolutely no substance and nothing of any consequence whatsoever. And indeed, I think it's almost comedic, some content in the podcast in relation to these two detectives. So first of all, we're going to start into the making of a detective number 11, podcast number 11, and we listened to the first podcast, and this is a little bit about Pat Marry and him coming back into the investigation in 2016.
Pat returned to work after a prolonged illness, but took himself off the Adrian Donoghue case, having been asked to share its lead with another officer. For the next 3 years, he'd be hard at work, investigating other high-profile cases across his district.
I had 2 or 3 other murder investigations on the go at the same time. I had Irene White, I had the double murder of Joseph Redmond and Anthony Burnett, and I had the sexual abuse allegations by Michael Shine.
He still felt bitter about the Donoghue investigation, that he should have been leading the case himself. To have been asked to co-lead it, as he put it, was an insult. The success he achieved in the years following held more personal significance because of it, but at the end of 2016, things took an unexpected turn. And Pat found himself back in the middle of Ireland's largest ever manhunt.
I'll tell you how I ended up back in the fold. Very, very simple. Time had passed, 3 years had passed, where this new management team had been in running Adrian's investigation, and the man who took my position, they promoted him. So they had no one to put in his place. I was the only person there. And they asked me, would you go back in? I said I would, because I was in a position of knowing I could do this. So I went in and took over the investigation from where it had been left by the last team, and I wasn't impressed at all. A lot of the recommendations I had made in respect of how the investigation should progress was not done.
Pat felt like he was starting from square one all over again. It brought him.
So the first clip there in that podcast number 11, Undercover, again the thread follows straight through. Pat Marry has been away from the investigation since end of 2013, and he's still holding a grudge against those in authority who asked him to share and work along with other people and oversee the investigation in 2013 going into 2014. He refused to do that. He couldn't lower himself to do that, and we can see that thread running through very clearly. But another thing that comes to the fore here is when you dissect that little clip, it's very simple. So we had a situation, Pat Marry tells us in 2016, he comes back, everything, he wasn't impressed at all, none of the recommendations was done, and the case, to all intents and purposes, was a mess. And an Garda Síochána promoted the man. According to Pat Marry, the man who took Pat Marry's place was now promoted. And let's say there was no one else, so we'll throw Pat Marry back in. When those in authority who were putting Pat Marry back into that position knew that Pat Marry hated them. So again, it shows very clearly the working environment in and around the incident room and around this case was toxic. Absolutely pathetic. And Pat goes on just to explain there that none of his recommendations were done. So let's have a look at this in a bigger scale. We had NCBI, we had Hanley, Phillips, McGovern, all these top detectives down from Harcourt Street, NCBI. We had Beggy, Mohan, Mangan, just to list just a few, and all the other underlings like Kenna, Gill, Reedy, Kerwin, all these people involved in investigation. And none of them took up Pat Marry's recommendations. So that shows you what they thought of the whole incident room and the superiors in the most important case in Irish criminal history. So there's something seriously wrong there. They didn't look at any of his recommendations and then they're bringing him back. So please, we really need people to understand the mess this investigation was in, and then as we move into the American aspect, you can see how they were preparing to create a total miscarriage of justice and what they were prepared to do to get anyone for this crime, anyone at all. So that's important. Now this is a very short little clip here, but again, it highlights this very serious issue with Marry and the incident room. And just listen to this short second clip now.
Back to those early dark days in January 2013.
I sat down with the team the first day I had taken it over in 2016, and I looked around and I never saw as many pale faces and dormant looks. And I said, lads, what's happening? Like, what's... No breaks, no, nothing. And
as I say, a very short little clip there, but vital information in relation to the investigation. Absolutely vital. And this is the reason. He sat down, there was no breaks, nothing at all. So we're heading to 4 years after the Morton robbery. So they had no breaks, they had nothing at all. Now, all the CCTV footage that we have scrutinised, all the phone records that had been scrutinised, and all the times of the alleged movement of vehicles during the robbery of the Passat in Clogherhead, the movement towards the murder scene, and most importantly, the alleged movement of a blue Passat from Lordship to a burn site deep in South Armagh. So none of that's mentioned. They had nothing. So I am saying quite categorically, what I have told you and what our campaign has told you from the start in relation to the burglary and the car being stolen in Clogherhead. False fiction, a curated narrative. The movements and all the forensic evidence that there was at the site of the modern robbery that has been airbrushed out. And the complete fabrication of a gang that simply does not exist, which we've covered quite clearly. Thanks to Mr. Big Stones, I hope everyone's seen that on Sunday last. There is no gang in connection with Aaron Brady. And then the absolutely farcical Times CCTV footage and the manipulations of fact by the specialist and Garda Kenna in the incident room. So they're telling us, Pat Marry is telling us very clearly they had nothing in 2016. They had almost 4 years to put that together. And occasionally, during the course of all the press conferences and the white shirts standing outside the CCJ and outside the steps of the Dundalk Garda Barracks, circumstantial evidence. Well, I'm saying in Aaron Brady's case, the circumstantial evidence, if you actually go into the proper meaning of what these people are saying, it's made up evidence. And it is evidence that was tampered with to create a false narrative. And that simple clip there, thanks to Pat Marry, he is telling us very clearly that 4 years after the Modern robbery, they had nothing. And they took Marry back to say, well, let's run with this and see what we can create. Because we've made a complete mess of the most serious crime in the history of the Irish criminal judicial system. So, and again, another little short clip coming up here now, and it shows some of the nonsense that these people are throwing out. It's very quick. Basically, it is about Aaron in America. We'll just play this here now.
But the Gardaí found it difficult to pinpoint exactly where he was living and what he was doing there. It was clear that once he made his exodus from Ireland, the investigation took on a whole new life of its own.
Now again, this is very important because the guards are saying here, or this Dial man is saying here, Garda found it difficult to find out where he was. Like even the newspapers have all Aaron's social media pictures from back in 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17. Everybody knew where he was. He never hid his identity. He was on Facebook and Instagram and all them things all day, every day. I seen pictures and videos of diggers and pile drivers every day, and they're up for everyone to see. So this thing of Dial here creating some sort of mystery as to where Aaron Brady was, and it's mentioned later on, and we'll cover it again when some of these American detectives are speaking, again is creating a narrative. It's only a simple little thing and means absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of things. But if you can see the attempt, and it succeeds in creating a narrative that it was some sort of a manhunt, that they had to go and seek Aaron Brady. Indeed, in part of the podcast, they were saying 80 million people in America, Brady could be anywhere. Such a load of nonsense. They had all his details, every move. Him in Gaelic Park, he was working on 46th Street, for example, I think for nearly 14 months, 15 months. Quite a big job in 46th Street. And videos and pictures every day of the machinery and what he was doing on that site. And pictures every weekend out in Gaelic Park. So, complete and utter nonsense, and it's creating a narrative and a backdrop for you, the public, to create a mystique and to try and build up for what's coming now in relation to these two gentlemen in America. We're going to have a look at that. But first, again, just another little snippet from Pat Marry. And it's important because it's a very serious contradiction. And it shows again Marry not accepting that someone else had done something in the investigation, and it was all down to him. It was all Pat Marry. So just going to have a quick listen to this clip.
There was merit in going to America, and it actually suggested that prior to me getting sick, like it's something that should be looked at because some of the suspects were gone to America. and it was something that I would have progressed if I hadn't got sick.
During Pat's time off, a relationship with the NYPD had been built up by the new senior investigating officer on the case. This would be pivotal in tracking down Aaron Brady as the time...
Again, very, very simple, very short clip there. And we have Pat Marry at the beginning saying that he had recommended that the authorities go to America, and he gives a very clear indication that in those 3 years that Pat Marry was off the investigation, that there was no interaction with the Americans, and that it was up to him. And then in the next breath, the Ian Doyle is telling us that the Garda barracks in Dundalk had made contact with the authorities in America, which they did in 2013, end of 2013, shortly after Pat Marry was off the case due to illness. And then his refusal to go back because he wouldn't work with the other Garda who's in charge of the case. So it's only a very simple thing, but it's a total contradiction, and it gives a very clear insight into Pat Marry's mental thoughts here, that it was all him, it was all his idea. He's saying they didn't go. He's telling us there, he's indicating that the guards didn't go to America, when they clearly did. And we'll show that later on, because it becomes quite important as the Homeland Security agents seem to be at odds about very basic detail. So we are going to move on now, and we're going to have a quick look at Eddie and Jimmy, so two American detectives.
On tracking down Aaron Brady. They wanted to know anything that they could about him, what sort of life he had built for himself. This is where Eddie Gonzalez and James Walsh come in. Both men are experienced NYPD detectives and were initially assigned to the Aaron Brady case during Pat's time off the investigation. The two had forged strong links with the case's senior investigating officer between 2014 and 2017. James is Eddie's superior, but the two men have worked together for years. And both men were at the top of their game when they first became involved in the case. This is James.
What I was doing prior to this case was domestic terrorism. Doing surveillance, trying to meet up with people.
James Walsh, or Jimmy to Eddie, is quiet enough and keeps things relatively close to his chest. Eddie, on the other hand, he's a big character.
Sometimes I make the drug deal and say, "You're not going to do this to me, really?" They were like, "Okay, you convinced me. All right, I'm going to sell to you. You go to jail."
Loud, animated, and full of conversation. Probably not what you'd expect for one of New York City's finest undercover agents. But rather than always keeping a low profile, he prided himself on being able to fit into his surroundings, and that's why he was so good at his job.
I can blend in there because there are Hispanics around there. And, I can drink with the best too, so there goes, let's go without saying.
Working closely with Homeland Security, the scope of the cases the detectives were assigned to would change quite often.
I was called into my commanding officer's office, and I was handed some papers, and I was told that I was going to be assigned a case to watch Aaron Brady, or try to contact Aaron Brady, or do surveillance on Aaron Brady. In that folder, there was information, there was pictures, there was addresses, and associates.
The Gardaí supplied the officers with any intel they had.
I started surveillance on what the Garda gave us as his residence, and we quickly found out that we didn't think he was living there.
On this typical case, he informed me that, he just got tapped on, Mr. Brady, that, he allegedly killed an officer in your country. And at which time he's like, "Listen, we're still trying to find out where he is located at."
So that's a brief introduction into Jimmy and Eddie, the two American detectives that were assigned the job of following and watching Aaron Brady. And I have no doubt, I'm sure, that they are part of New York's finest detectives. But what we are going to do is look at the value to the case, and we're going to have a very brief look at their input into this podcast and the information they gathered, and how completely and utterly useless it was, and how Jimmy Walsh there, I'll show you some newspaper articles where he's talking absolute and complete nonsense in relation to his investigation into Aaron. But more importantly here, again, it's a very simple thing, but at the end of that clip there, Gonzalez says that Jimmy was tapped up, that they were going to have to follow Aaron Brady because he allegedly killed a cop. Now, very briefly, I'm just going to show you this clip from a Homeland Security officer, Mr. Mantuso. And just listen to this, please.
Located in New York City. By all accounts, he had a great profession. He was making good money in the United States, working there.
Homeland Security, Assistant Gardaí.
It was about 2014, 2015. The Garda reached out to us and they gave us a name, a person of interest. But they didn't really disclose exactly what was behind that. What we normally do in any investigation, we started running our records checks, and we determined that the person was in the United States illegally. And we advised the Garda that we could have this person removed, deported from the United States.
There we have Mr. Mantuso from the Homeland Security Office. And he's telling us that an Garda Síochána did not tell them the details of Aaron Brady's case in 2014, 2015. He didn't even know when the investigation started over there. So that's totally at odds at what Mr. Gonzalez is telling us. Now, this is very important for a number of reasons. Again, it just shows when you're making up stories and telling lies, it's very hard to keep everything smooth throughout. So either Gonzalez or Mantuso is telling lies. One of them have got it wrong. And we have to assume that Gonzalez is telling us, Eddie's telling us the truth here because that was his brief for following Aaron Brady. So we also have to ask here, Mr. Mantuso says at the end of his clip that they could have deported Aaron Brady immediately because Aaron had overstayed his 6-month ESTA visa. So we have to look at why would members of an Garda Síochána want to keep Aaron in America when he was needed back here. There's a possibility Aaron could have clocked. I know Eddie and Jimmy are excellent detectives. Aaron might never have seen them, but he could have clocked them and pissed off to Mexico or somewhere, or Brazil or anywhere. Changed his route around America, his position in America completely. So why did they not bring Aaron Brady back immediately? And we are saying quite categorically here that Pat Marry, Mark Phillips and the authorities here in Ireland were prepared to start putting together criminals to give false statement against Aaron. Now we know that an Garda Síochána had some contact with Daniel Cahill because of his involvement with Dean Evans and the Real IRA and the Ryans in Dublin. Because Daniel Cahill told us himself that Homeland Security had called previously to his house looking for Dean Evans. So they had him in situ. How he was still in America is a mystery. But this again, they're only small little bits of information, but unless we delve down into it and look at it, it's very simple. Why, as Mr. Mantuso said, we were willing to lift Aaron Brady and deport him. Why would you take the chance of Aaron absconding again? Why didn't you take him home in 2014? 2015? 2016? Because they had to get in place the stories from criminals and people who had serious immigration issues to tell lies and set up a narrative. Because if we go back to Pat Marry coming back onto this case in 2016, we had no breaks, nothing at all. So they had absolutely nothing and they had to create something. So that's what these little clips are explaining to us here, and that's how Walsh and Gonzalez were involved with Aaron initially. And Eddie says they were working closely with Homeland Security, so that's Mr. Mantuso. So I know it's a bit drawn out, but it's very, very important to understand how this all started. And Pat Marry and Garda Síochána going over into America. I can see them doing it now and saying, this is Aaron Brady, he shot our colleague. And obviously, these people here in Homeland Security, and rightly so, if the guards had to be telling the truth, were more than willing to help. And obviously, the man that's not mentioned at all in any of these podcasts, Agent Matt Katsky, he was willing to go above and beyond to get false statements and offer deals, inducements, green cards, money, and make criminal proceedings disappear. He's not even mentioned in this podcast. So I know it's a little bit protracted, but it is vitally, vitally important. So that gives us an insight into the mindset. Again, continuing 3 years into the case, 4 years into the case. Delays between An Garda Síochána and Homeland Security because they want the narrative to sit correctly. Because it's very difficult for them to explain why Aaron wasn't deported immediately. And what we will do now in the next video, when we're dissecting the next part of podcast number 11, is we're going to look at the useless information that was gathered by Gonzalez and Walsh. And again, that'll give us some insight into the fluffiness and the complete and absolute absurdity of what went on during the course of the investigation. So we'll bring you that video tomorrow evening. Thank you.